You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brooke-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And the next way to walk that path is Waking the Wild Masculine, coming this September. A man's true power is alchemized through the depth of his purpose and the degree to which he has sovereignty over the direction of his life. However, almost all men today lack the guidance, support, and initiation to create that purpose and sovereignty, which is why Jonathan has been called to lead another potent circle of men through a journey of wild masculine reclamation. Go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM to discover more about Wake the Wild Masculine and to claim your place in Sacred Circle. And just to say, the spaces are intentionally limited to create the most intimate and powerful experience, and they do fill up fast. So take action now to be sure of your place. And now onto this week's show. It's with my fourth-time guest and friend, the amazing James Tripp. James has been exploring personal mastery and human potential through philosophy, psychology, movement and martial arts, NLP, hypnosis, and more since 1992. He is known internationally as the developer of Hypnosis Without Trance, and also for his work coaching personal adaptiveness and results creation. James has run workshops and presented at conferences across 4 continents and works remotely from his home in Edinburgh with clients from around the globe. You can find him on YouTube as James Tripp Chaos Wave, and on Facebook as James Tripp, and on Instagram as The Tripnotist. In today's show, we spoke about the kind of will that is called true will in magical practice versus being in the flow of non-doing, unconscious consumption, and beating ourselves into compliance with willpower. This was such a juicy and deep conversation. We went all over the place. I really enjoyed it. I very much hope you will too. Let's dive in. Hello, James. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Leanne. It's good to be here again. I think this is third time.
I was adding up. Well, I was looking through the episodes. I think it could be the 4th. And you are in very, very select few. Very few people have made it 4 shows.
I'll take that as a win. It's good to be here.
Yeah. And it's funny because we were, then we weren't, then we were.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening, James and I planned to do a show. We then ended up spending about 45 minutes just chatting. Then James realized, actually, I don't think right now feels like the right time to do a show. We carried on chatting. And then it was just like, do you know what? This is a show. Let's just start recording. So that's how we've ended up here. And I was just pondering, as I made a cup of tea before we hit record, this is actually kind of meta. It feels to me like this is us doing our will, recognizing that conversation that was coming out of us about will is our will to put out there into the world. And I was like, oh, I love how that's occurred. And it really wasn't where either of us were in terms of that, I guess more just human personal intention. Is this seemed to come in really clearly, no, this is what's here to be spoken about today.
Yeah, I think that resonates for me strongly because, the topic we're talking about at the moment, we're going to explore, which we have said loosely is the idea of will, which is a very much
I think, misunderstood topic, or certainly has been misunderstood by me. And it can be quite kind of scary for some people, the idea of will, because, will, does that mean we're placing ourselves under our will? Does it mean we're making a slave of ourselves? Does it mean taking more responsibility in life? It can be quite an intimidating topic for a lot of people, and one that many prefer to stay away from. But there's a lot of power in exploring. I think it enables us to have higher levels of mastery, understanding the concept of will better, higher levels of mastery in our lives. And as I've said before, personal mastery doesn't mean making a slave of ourselves. And that's what people fear, I think, sometimes when they talk about will and this sort of thing. But we'll dive into it. It's a multifaceted topic.
We certainly will. So we were chatting before about these sort of different places that people find themselves in fairly unconscious consumption, which is, I guess, fairly typical for mainstream culture. Then there's this kind of like idealizing this idea of flow and non-doing. Then there's this kind of like, I need to force myself to do this and be really committed and, make sure I keep doing the things even if I don't want to do them. And as we were talking, both of us have found this real power in understanding this idea of true will and how that can become a place that we can actually navigate life from. And I love that you use the word power. For me, it really has been this like, this is how I can tap into this source of power that I can actually live life from. So I'd love to know, before we go anywhere else, when you're talking about will, how do you define it? How do you experience it?
Okay. It's actually a term that I've not traditionally been over fond of. And
it's not the sexiest word, is it really?
It isn't. It's always sounded a bit dry, a bit austere for me. And I've always generally been, I like a bit of pleasure. I like a bit of luxury and these sorts of things in life. So it's not something I've ever been especially drawn to. And I sort of became drawn to it more and more because of other people using it in interesting and different ways. So I always qualify this. I'm not a big raging Aleister Crowley fan or big Crowley scholar or anything like this. I'm just a guy that kind of dips into things all over the place. So I've dipped into some of Crowley's stuff. And Aleister Crowley, who was a notorious individual, and notorious largely because I think of his own trickster nature and his desire to create an image of himself that was somewhat provocative. But he developed a self-development system, or he called it a religion even, which like a non-theistic religion called Thelema. And the central tenet of that is this idea, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I think I heard that expression probably first of all when I was a teenager, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that sort of appealed to me as a teenager. That really appealed to me. Because, how I read that, the rebellious teenage me was like, yeah, do what you want to do whatever you fancy. Yeah. And at the time as a teenager, I was into partying and all of that. And it's like, I didn't want to have a mainstream job and live under the yoke of society. So it seemed like a kind of rebel cry, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, screw it. I didn't think any more deeply about it than that for the longest time. As I got older, and particularly over the last few years, life changes, things move on. We enter different phases of life. I've got kids, I've got a family, I'm thinking about more than just myself. So it's like, well, what does that mean? Do what thou wilt. Do I just carry on partying while I have a family? Does that, what if I don't feel like doing any work or making any money? Well, hey, that's all right. But there's a bigger picture there for me. So it kind of had me revisit that. And certainly for myself, across the years, I made more and more of a choice to live my life as a creator, as a difference maker, as a sort of volitional, or sort of starting to touch on there, intentional force of creation in life. Because that seemed like, I don't know, I don't know why. I'm not even going to bother trying to justify why, because that's just what came through, I guess. And so this starts to kind of bring about this idea of intentionality, and how do we say, that's what I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to bring about? What is this I that seems to choose real? Because some will say that I is an illusion, right? It's a complete illusion. I just kind of, can I go a little side tangent here that leads into this, that's relevant to me personally?
Of course. It wouldn't be a show with you and I if you didn't.
No. So I'm known largely, and have been for many years, as a hypnosis guy, as a teacher of hypnosis. I just put my book out. I'll do my book plug right now, Hypnosis Without Trance, How Hypnosis Really Works. And, it's an interesting topic.
It's absolutely fine. I've got to let listeners know this.
Yeah.
The actual topic I thought we were going to talk about was James's book. Came on, was like, that's not what I want to talk about. Hence why we ended up not thinking we were going to record the show. So the very fact he's plugged it's kind of ironic.
Well, I will say this. I mean, I've spent years exploring hypnosis, but for like this weird reason, I was never drawn to hypnosis to start with. I got into hypnosis because I was an NLP coach. I loved NLP. And I got into NLP in the early 2000s. And the thing I loved about NLP was it had so many tools and perspectives and ideas that I could use to empower myself in my life to be more of a creative force, more able to create what I wanted to create. It seemed to offer me so much. And I absolutely loved this. And I started to learn NLP and teach myself NLP and really explore deeply with NLP from the early 2000s. I didn't do a formal NLP training until 2006. And on that training, part of what we learned was this Ericksonian hypnosis stuff and these formal trance inductions. And I will say right now, I had zero interest in it. Just did it as part of the course. No interest. The whole hypnosis bit, not really especially interested. I was interested in what people called conversational hypnosis, because that was about my ability to use my language of communication to create results in the world. Not about controlling people, but creating results. That's how it looked to me. So I never enjoyed this idea in hypnosis, and it's not so much there in Ericksonian hypnosis, but in old school hypnosis, about controlling people. Almost, we're talking about will, subverting their will, getting around their will. And also in the world of hypnosis, there's no love for what's often called the conscious mind or will or intentionality. It's like the whole hypnosis game is often predicated on getting around that stuff. Getting around will, getting people's will offline if it ever existed in the first place. So there's a whole debate of, well, will is an illusion anyway, so we're just bypassing it. So I never really kind of enjoyed that. The only reason I ended up getting deep into hypnosis was, number one, I actually wasn't getting that much business as an NLP coach back in the day. And somebody suggested to me I become a hypnotherapist. And they said, you can do all your NLP coaching stuff. Just do a bit of a trance induction at the end. You'll be good to go. So I was like, all right, I'll do that. But once I was declaring myself as a hypnotherapist, I thought, well, I better really get this hypnosis game, because this is how I work. I've got reasonably high levels of integrity. I don't like being a fake. So I'm like, right, I'm going to go deep into this. And so I explored the nature of hypnosis, did a lot of hypnosis, explored with hypnotic phenomena stuff. And it seemed to me that hypnosis wasn't what people were painting it up to be. It didn't quite work the way people thought it worked. And that's how I put up a blog called Hypnosis Without Trance back in 2009.
Oh, wow. Long time ago.
And a long time ago. And that really took off. And I sort of got known as a hypnosis guru and a hypnosis guy with a very different way of looking at hypnosis and making sense of it and explaining it. And my book, actually, that I've just put out is the sort of book version. It's more up to date, but it's that model of hypnosis. But here's the thing. That was a big kind of side avenue for me, because what I was really about was being more effective at creating what I wanted to create in the world, not hypnotizing people. I was like a side thing. So I got known as sort of, and it really took off, and people were coming to my trainings, all this kind of thing. Then back in, I think it's 2013, I hired a guy, you will know, a guy called Steve Chandler to coach me, really around kind of developing my business and stuff like this. But it was really interesting working with Steve because he had no hypnosis in his background and no NLP.
Oh, it's unusual, isn't it? I'd say for older coaches. Steve,
Yeah.
if you're listening to this, sorry to call you an older coach.
Well, yeah, Steve is an old. I was going to do a video for YouTube, by the way, called "I Got Schooled by a Slow Old Guy." Steve, if you're listening to this, that's you. Because I totally did get schooled by Steve, or really, honestly. And again, Steve, if you're listening to this, I thank you now because that coaching was and has remained truly transformative for me.
He's a real master.
Yeah. And he was the right guy for me at the right time. And one of the things that was hugely game-changing was, as I remember it, at some point in some session early on, Steve said to me, I was saying something or other. I have no idea what I was saying, but he said to me, stop identifying with your past. Stop identifying with your personality. Stop identifying with your history. And start identifying with the I that chooses. And, coming in from, nobody ever talked in NLP about the I that chooses. Nobody certainly talked about that in hypnosis, or if they ever mentioned anything like that, it was about how to get round that, how to take the I that chooses offline. And this I that chooses, and this shift alone, this identifying with the I that chooses. Now, I know there are people out there that will say, well, that I is just an illusion. Maybe. But it's an interesting illusion, and it's a powerful illusion. And it has functionality in a variety of different ways. I'm not saying it's the only way to live, but I'd never really done much around looking at developing or cultivating this I that chooses, this sense of I am and I can, like this really stripped back core sense of I am and I can. And, I cannot even begin to describe how that changed the course of my life and what vistas that opened up, what possibilities that opened up, and liberating possibilities, not that old kind of willpower idea of suppressing my impulses or my instincts or anything like that, but stepping to this place where there was a center that I could be in and come from that, had a profound power and an ability to make choices about how I met the world. Wasn't controlling the world, wasn't controlling myself, wasn't controlling what came through from me, but was much more of this clear-minded steward of and guide, but that did have this power to stand in any given moment and be fully conscious and choose. That was huge. That was a powerful shift for me in my life. And since then, I've become more interested in this idea. Now, Steve didn't call it will, didn't say this is your will. It was the I that chooses. But to me, there's a close overlap.
Totally. Yeah. I really love that you've brought it there, because what I've really been noticing over the last year is how this idea, sometimes it's spoken in the coaching world as like being a creator, and that idea of being able to make conscious choices as opposed to being compelled by largely fear, which is how most people are living unless they start to go on this path of freeing themselves from it. And in the work that we do, Wake and Wild, we typically refer to it as sovereignty. And then the more I've got into magic, and the more I've realized what we could refer to as like the magician archetype, that energetic, that kind of being center of the circle, creating life from it, these feel to me like more and more distinct and therefore maybe powerful lenses on that eye that chooses. And it doesn't seem to me like there's a kind of creator mindset, and then over here, over some sort of like, you know, distance place, there's this magician mindset. It feels to me the magician mindset is just like a deeper level of understanding how much power we actually have to make those creative choices.
I think, like, certainly there's this old Zen koan, or at least it's an old Zen koan according to Robert Anton Wilson, which runs, who is the great magician who makes the grass green? And, you know, I'm going to give the punchline, which you're not supposed to do with a koan, but of course,
I don't know if that's allowed.
Unenlightened me, but yeah, screw enlightenment. But you know, the place that people are being led to is to realize that they are the great magician that makes the grass green. They are the creator of their experience. And I think that everybody's a creator. They're like a creator with a small c. They have an incredible power to create their own experience, their own phenomenology. And they don't just have a power to do it, they are doing it. They're creating their own experience, their own phenomenology, how they show up, how they engage with the world. And of course, the results they're going to get habitually sort of unfold from that. But most people don't realize it. And to me, the magician, or at least one rendering of the magician archetype, I guess, or the magician at this kind of really deep level, is the creator with the capital C, the one who realizes it. Wow, I have all this capacity to create. And I can learn more about this. I can deepen my wisdom around this and become more effective at steering that creative process towards particular ends and volitionally chosen ends. You know, that sovereignty that you talk about, that idea of like, where do I channel this sort of dynamic creative machinery? Now, of course, there's the other side of it.
I would like use the machinery there, James.
Yeah, like because it's there. And I use the metaphor of machinery because it's doing it anyway.
Yes, it's happening.
See what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like it's already doing it, whether or not you're going to steer it or guide it or shape it. It's already doing it. So you know, I don't mean that to sort of seem inorganic. I mean it to like that idea of the machine that never stops, because it doesn't. It's creating. It's creating. It's creating. Now, the other side of that might be to say, yeah, and even the idea that there's a you that's creating is created, so it doesn't exist, and it's like, you know, down that rabbit hole. So you've got this sort of two approaches here: the black path, what I often call the black path, and the white path. And again, this is an idea influenced by Crowley. So the white path is the path of life. It's like, yes, there is an I, and I do live in the world, and so now what, right? Now let's live.
And even if it's an illusion, I'm going to empower it. I'm going to kind of fully choose into living in that illusion.
Right, absolutely. There's that Guns N' Roses album, Use Your Illusion, from way back in the, I think, early 90s. But I love that use your illusion, that idea. For me, that's the kind of ultimate, okay, yeah, maybe all this is an illusion. But it's kind of like, in 3P, which I love, I've got so much value from 3 principles, but there's this idea that thought is the creative principle. But there's no intentionality about what's created with thought. And of course, I'm not knocking that, because that's not what 3P is about. It's not about using that. It's not about living into that intentionality and utilizing that creative principle towards particular ends. It's got a different paradigm. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. I'm just highlighting a difference.
Oh, can I just jump in there? You just let me see something more clearly than I had it named before. So if we go on the idea that the machine is creating and is the creator with a lowercase c for most of the world, most people out there, through understandings like the 3 principles, but also, you know, many other forms of, say, non-duality type paths, they are then recognizing they are the creator with small c. Doesn't make them, it doesn't suddenly lend the capital C. It just allows them to know they are the creator with a lowercase c, which most of the world don't know that. There's real power in recognizing, oh, okay, I am this thing that is creating, but it doesn't, there is a deeper choice here that we're talking about. I'm saying deeper, maybe take the word deeper out of it. There is another choice available here that creates that capital C that we're talking about here. And yeah, that's, I've not seen that distinction before quite so clearly. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. I mean, to me, that's one of the things that I've not seen before this conversation is that point about, you know, it's the I that chooses. May well be made up, but that doesn't mean that what we make up isn't powerful and isn't useful and isn't real. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, completely.
You know, so the idea that I think one of the things about what I call the kind of black path side of things, which for me, I would include, say, the work of Byron Katie, a lot of non-dual stuff, the three principle stuff, Buddhism, these sorts of things. That's all about dissolving that I. Often, you know, that's a big part is dissolving that I, and I think there's real value in doing that. Because it's the old, you know, the old alchemical formula of solve e coagula. You know, you've got to dissolve and put back together. To me, that dissolving side is really important. And I think people can't have, you know, nobody can have that magician level mastery over their own creative and generative faculties if they can't dissolve their existing creations.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah. Totally.
Because they're just going to be stuck where they were.
Yes.
They're not going to be able to recreate themselves, recreate their engagement with the world, anything like that, if they're hooked into the idea that, well, this is true, but this is a fact about who I am or what I am or what is or isn't so in the world. So that dissolving is important.
Oh, another aspect to this as well that I think is really helpful when people have gone down a spiritual path first, before perhaps getting to this point of recognizing the magical path is for them, is that, you know, the other quote, sort of probably the other most famous Crowley quote of love is the law, love under will. People who have walked more kind of, you know, non-dual spiritual paths like that do have, I guess, a better understanding or a better experience or a deeper experience of living as love. There is a much more experience that is love-based rather than fear-based, which I think then lends itself to choosing into a magical path from, I would say, a kind of healthier place versus going directly into the like a, say, chaos magic or whatever directly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely so. I mean, I got this kind of love-hate thing with the world of magic, you know, particularly chaos magic. I've got so much from chaos magic, and a lot of it I just find, I don't know, somewhat superficial or whatever. I don't know.
It feels like it lacks heart to me. Which
yes. I think that's probably. It's probably. I'm trying to think about what I'm saying, and when you say it lacks heart, it's almost like there's a. She was a bit teenage boy sometimes. Chaos magic.
That's so funny. That's exactly the mental image I have, and I'm sure that is not so for like so many chaos magicians. If you're a chaos magician listening to this, we aren't saying you are teenage boys, but that's the archetype I have in mind.
It's sort of kind of this. There can be, I think, a bit of a lack of it, at least some of what I read in that world. And on the flip side of that, I think there are some really important insights and understandings. The idea of love, you know, I often talk about what's in your heart, and identifying what's in your heart. That to me is the essence of going back to this idea of true will. Or I say going back to this idea because this might have been from the conversation we were having before the recording.
We've gone all over the place in this one.
Let me reiterate. So going back to the Crowley idea of do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. And I was saying as a teenager, that really appealed to me because it's like, yeah, whatever, I can do my thing. But this idea, do what thou wilt with the whole of the Lord, this will that is being talked about here is something called true will, which is different from impulse. It's different from, that dopamine hit or whatever that somebody might be chasing, or, it's different from being dopamine driven, so to speak.
That's a good way of saying it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for neuroscience heads out there.
Or can I just drop this in as well? Because this is interesting, actually. I've not seen this distinction before. We both learn a lot when we have these conversations. We ought to do it more often. I was just thinking how I often talk about being compelled and you're talking about being impelled, if that's the word. And I was thinking, it's interesting how you're talking about being those impulses that come from dopamine. Whereas, of course, we also can be driven by compulsions that are coming from fear. Either one create this this kind of like knee-jerk, instinctive, unconscious way of engaging and creating the world versus something that we're now distinguishing as this other place we can be making choices from, true will. But I just wanted to add that in because I think there's both that show up for people. There's that kind of like, dopamine. And there's also that kind of like, oh my God, I can't do that, or I have to do this because I'm driven by fear.
Yeah. And I think actually those two are partners in crime. And this, I'm going to talk about addictions again. I said I wasn't going to talk about addictions.
Are you sure you want to do this, James?
I'm going to mention this briefly because I think it's relevant to everybody in a lot of ways. Is that kind of dopamine hit stuff, the dopamine chasing, just sort of going for the going into those sort of dopamine flows. They can be very nice, safe, comfortable places to be in. This is one of the things I have done in the past, a lot of work with addictions. And one of the things that I think is it's a loose way of putting it, but like people's addictions are their safe cave. It's their place they can go where the world goes away. And the world there is everything they fear, right? The fears go away, everything in that moment. Somebody might be like, I don't know, a gambling, they might be compulsively or impulsively gambling. And they're kind of really in a flow state when they're doing their gambling and they're caught up in it. Now, of course, the fears may come back later on when they're out of the state again. But the two of them, they can work hand in hand. So our fears, if we're addressing our fears, that's horrible. Nobody wants to be living in fear. So where do we go? We escape. Dopamine. Let's go on a little dopamine slide and enjoy that for a bit. So none of that. And like when Crowell is saying, "Do what thou wilt with the whole of the law," he's talking about stepping out of that. That's not the easy choice in life of just slide man, go with the flow. That's the tougher choice.
Totally.
And it's also like if you look at what's in your heart, it's that tougher choice of being able to unpick what are all the stories in my head that are coming from the shoulds and shouldn'ts I was raised with, what Freud might call the superego or whatever, or Nietzsche would call he had that metaphor of a dragon of society, with all the scales being a thou shalt on them. So we've got all that stuff with these ideas we pick up about what we should and shouldn't do and what rules apply to us, and what judgments as to whether we're a good person or not. And there's all that crap there. And it's finding this thing that really has us come alive. Because so far as I'm concerned, compulsion seeking never really has anybody come alive. Right? However much of a high it might be, somebody might, it's not them coming alive. It's them being taken away from life into some fantasy space of some fantasy flow space or something like that. It's not like this vibrant, really being alive and really present and really living in the world and bringing through what you have that wants to come through. And I think part of that as well is there's a faith in that for a lot of people, that what wants to come through is going to be the greatest thing for yourself and the world anyway. And staying out of those fears of like, oh my God, but what if that's just self-indulgent? What if that isn't really an important thing? all of that kind of stuff. So that thing about like your true will and being able to find it and go, yeah, this is what wants to come through, not for reasons of escape, not for reasons of hiding, but it's the boldest thing, and it's the bravest thing, it's the most courageous, that curve from the heart.
Yeah.
To be able to like really have that come through and really have the faith to sort of to align with that and live into that.
So what's just showing up for me is that, going back to what we were talking about earlier about that recognition that we're creator with small c, then moving into that space of, oh wow, I am the creator, capital C. I can bring intention and actually powerfully create what I want. And then there's a point where this certainly happened for me. It may not be quite as clearly articulated as I'm about to say, where it's like, so knowing myself as this powerful creator, what do I create? And this is for me, the kind of like the deepest, most kind of, I guess, the work I guess I'll be in for the rest of my life is, as you're saying, recognizing the way that those cultural shadows, my own personal wounds, are trying to have me create things that aren't actually in alignment with that true will. And noticing, and that for me is like why work, whatever you want to do that work, that's why that work of freeing ourselves from that stuff that will tell us this is a good idea, this is a good idea, this is what I should create, because we can create anything. That's when it becomes, for me, it's like the more powerful creators we are, the more important it becomes that we understand that which really wants to be created through us. That again, whether we call it soul, whether we call it, divine will, true will, that for me suddenly becomes so important once we recognize we are that creator.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think one of the pitfalls that people encounter when listening to these sorts of ideas is going, well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what really is in my heart. I don't know how can I know what my true will is?
Yeah.
And where people go is they often sort of go, or at least what I point out to them is that they're trying to do something in abstract. They think there's some sort of process they can separate themselves from the world, take themselves out of the world, and sit down and have a really good think. and maybe go through the right coaching set of coaching questions or coaching exercise, and they'll come up with their true will or what's in their heart.
This is my purpose. This is why I'm here.
Yeah, and now they can go back into the world empowered by their purpose. And I don't think it works like that. I think that people find, or the place to find is through exploration, and not through separation, not through separating from the world and sitting in a quiet space and thinking. I mean, sometimes some internal reflection, sure, that's part of the exploration. But there's also exploration out there in the world. I often say to clients, one of the things I'll say, coaching clients, is I say, tell me something that was a huge game changer for you in your life. Like, was such a massive difference maker. I've done this a lot of times with clients, and I've yet to be thwarted on this one. And they'll tell me something, and I'll say, tell me how that came about. And they always tell me a story of, well, I was at this party and I met this guy I went to this new gym or something, and it was always about them being out in the world somewhere. Right? At no point was it ever, well, I was sat there, I don't know, I was sat there scrolling through Facebook, or, it's never that. I was sat there eating a massive pile of donuts, or maybe it might be, I suddenly realized, what the hell am I doing eating the donuts? But it always comes through engagement with the world, not through necessarily separation, but it's a certain type of engagement. It's an engagement where consciousness is showing up and connections are being made. So it's an alive engagement. It's a live engagement with fresh stuff. So I often suggest to people, I say, look, get out there and start doing different things. Get out and start exploring things and attune to what wants to come through as you do that. And it isn't about knowing what the right thing to do. Should I do that, or should I do that? Should I go to a ceramics class, or should I go and take up Muay Thai or something? It's like, well, just take some action, pick something to explore. You'll find out what comes through from that for you.
I love that. Links, actually, I did a episode with mutual friend of ours, Ryan Simbai Jenkins, last week on fortune. And it's based around the research on luck, but then also through the magical frame. And they kind of gave two recommendations at the end, a magical one and a mundane one. The mundane one was go out and have a conversation with one new person every week, just because of exactly what you're talking about, like what that creates in terms of new opportunities, but also just experience of being in the world and discovering what's for us through doing so.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, one of my favorite magical formulas comes from the most unmagical individual, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who in his, I think it was after the 10th anniversary of his book, The Black Swan, he did like a new afterword. And he said people had critiqued him for not giving any advice. And he said, well, it's not my job to give advice. I'm an analyst. I'm just saying what is. I'm not going to give you any advice. But if I was to give you some advice, it would be expose yourself to serendipity, mitigate the downsides, and leverage the upsides.
Oh,
That's his advice for life, because the whole point of the Black Swan is the only thing we know from history is that you can't predict anything. That's the only lesson of history. So you've got this kind of, and I love this, and I call this dancing results out of reality. And it's a way of being in the world that I really love. It's about having emergent results come about, because you don't get to see what's coming ahead of time necessarily. Right? You engage in a certain way, results come about. Cool. That's kind of one way of sort of doing magic. But where is intentionality in that? Where is will in that? And it can be really absent. You could just be going, yeah, good thing, bad thing. In which case, how are you judging good thing, bad thing? Is it based actually on your fears again? Or is it based upon your, just like, oh, that makes me feel good. Yeah, cool, I have more of that. And I think the trick is to do that, but with this sort of, some people use that metaphor of the North Star. The North Star, you're not trying to get to the North Star. Your aim isn't to get to that star, but it's a navigational point when you're out kind of sailing the oceans. And I think, inside of that, expose yourself to serendipity, leverage the upsides, mitigate the downsides. There's also this tuning into the sort of inner North Star of what's in your heart, so that can become a massive part of what's steering that engagement and that exposure to serendipity, and steering the connections that get made when or the connections that are serendipity. Serendipity are connections, they're alignments. It's that kind of thing. But if you haven't got that sort of North Star of what's in your heart, those things that would connect might not connect, because you haven't got that.
Yes.
I can't quite put this into words because it's a beyond words kind of a thing. But so it's not about ignoring. A lot of people think about intentionality as like, right, I'm going to cut through everything. I'm going to cut through everything. So whatever's happening in the world, nothing will thwart me. Whatever circumstances come up, I'm going to steam through them. I'm going to make this damn thing happen. And to me, that's the old school willpower approach. Doesn't matter what sirens call me, I will be on my path fiercely. But to me, true will isn't about that at all. It's not about the suppression or the pushing away or the ignoring of the world. It's about engagement with the world. But it's about how you guide your engagement with the world, or that place that you guide from.
So what you were just saying put me in mind of that, in magical terms, that dance between having what you could call an intention or a vision, but not having a focus on the how. And so that kind of, this is where I'm going in alignment with will, but I'm now available to kind of be in life and create whatever's showing up, because I can't predict all the beautiful ways, all the aligned actions, all of the opportunities, all the people that are going to allow that intention to become manifest. So a mundane frame would be, this is where I'm going and these are the steps that I need to take to get there. And a magical frame would be, that's the intention. I'm going to walk the path and know I don't need to be in control of how that happens.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is that kind of sums up my view on the magical modes of engagement. Is very much it's creating that intention of with a certain energy to it. Like I often say, vision. People use that term vision. I have a vision, and I use the term as well. It occurred to me a little while ago that when I have vision, it isn't really. It's an inappropriate metaphor in some ways. It's not actually a clear picture of exactly how things must be. It's a metaphor we all use. Oh, vision. I'm going to realize this vision. But what I actually have is more like an energy than a clear picture. That it feels, it resonates, it vibrates a certain way.
Yeah.
And I call it vision. But actually, what do I see? I'm not sure I see too much. For me, it's much more of a kind of energy signature or something.
Because if you did see too much, that would almost necessitate the how, wouldn't it? It'd be kind of like, if you had all the details, you'd know exactly what it is, therefore how to get it.
Right. And that, for me, the danger in that is ending up what I call grasping too tight.
Definitely. Yeah. It can only be this way. It has to look exactly like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, I want that kind of energy, that like, something like this. I want it to have choices about how it comes into the world. I'm a great believer that all creation is co-creation. So whilst I say, yes, we are creators, I don't mean that we are controllers. I don't mean that we get to force things upon the universe. It's very much a dance with the universe. It's a co-creative dance. But it's like, what do we bring? Well, we bring this true will, this what's in our heart, this vision. And when we the art of magic, and I don't care whether people take that literally or metaphorically, but the art of magic is to be able to show up with that and hold that, not too tight, not too loose, whilst dancing with life, dancing with the complexity of life and having that come out. But it really is it's a subtle art, I think. At least for me, my experience of this is a subtle art. Because the thing is when I'm dancing, I love dancing. Right? I love dancing with the universe. And I can go into a flow state doing that. But it's very easy to let the flow state take over and my intentionality to drift out. And it doesn't disappear suddenly, it drifts out. And I'm in flow and it's all good and I'm creating. And then I'm in flow and I'm creating less. And I'm in flow and I'm creating less. And now I'm just in flow. Oh, I'm back into a flow of impulses. My true will is ducked out somewhere or drifted off somewhere.
It's like there's a kind of gravity that pulls, like without that intentionality, that kind of, there is something about being in that flow state that starts to pull us back down into unconsciousness.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, actually. I think the ability to bring consciousness is powerful, and to stand in the place of the I that chooses the will, what's in our heart. I think that's really powerful, but we're not meant to live like that. And if we were to try and live like that, it probably wouldn't work because we'd be holding on too tight to that state of being. So I think it's a powerful place to be able to visit regularly. It's good to go to the top of the mountain to get the clear view, but that doesn't mean that you want to live on the top of the mountain all the time.
Yeah.
So the question is for me, it's always like, how much consciousness do I want to bring? How much how much do I want to go right? It's time to refocus. It's time to bring the vision back. It's time to reattune, reattune. And it's finding that, because too much drift for me, and I can get lost. Particularly the kind of work that you and I do. Maybe it's the same for you. I don't know. Maybe this is just a thing that's peculiar for me. I don't have a boss. And if I don't do any work today, assuming I don't have any appointments or anything like that, if I don't do any work today, it's not going to affect my income today or tomorrow or anything like that. So I have a lot of freedom in my life, which is part of what I've created in my life. I've chosen to create that freedom. I value freedom. I like having freedom. So I have a lot of freedom in my life. That means that I could easily go, yeah, today I'm just going to do that. I can go into impulse. I can go into impulse for days on end. I can go into impulse for weeks on end, and it won't overly affect my income at that point. And that means, I'm not relying on some external structure like a job or an employer or all of that. Okay, the closest I come is when I've got appointments booked in, and I'm going to honor those appointments. So it does mean that I have to be a lot more aware of drift. There's no immediate downside to the drift, not right now. But across time, it's going to erode my being, my mode of engagement in the world, and all of this kind of thing. So for myself, it's like it's finding that it's not balance, it's interplay. It's interplay between bringing consciousness and high levels of intentionality to set a direction, and then letting go enough for there to be enough flow and nebulous connection and all of this kind of thing. But then not spending too much time in that zone that the intentionality just wanes, and the energy that created and the direction that created. So there's like very much an interplay. And for me, I'll just say this right now, like one of the very early influences on me in my early 20s was Taoism and the concept of yin and yang. And the thing that I often point out, when people think of yin and yang, they go, yeah, balance. Yin and yang's got nothing to do with balance. It's about interplay, not balance. And to me, life is about interplay. Interplay is dynamic and it moves. Balance is
like static.
Right?
Yeah.
It's static, yeah. And you see this like in the Chariot in the Tarot de Marseille. You've got the two horses, and they're kind of like pulling off in different directions. But the charioteer is harnessing those energies, pulling in different directions to create something from that.
Yeah. It's funny because that was my card yesterday, was the Chariot, my card for
Right.
today. And so it's really fresh for me. And yeah, I love that. It's the tension between the two, that creative tension, rather than like, oh, they're perfectly balanced and going in the same direction.
Right. And like my reading on that is the Chariot is the culmination of that first line, which to me, that first line represents mastery of the material world, the life and the world around us. So you've got that culmination of that mastery of the charioteer working with the forces pulling in different directions, bringing those together, but also in the Tarot de Marseille, which is the deck that I play with, there's no reins on the horses. It's hands-free. The charioteer is hands-free, not there trying to control those two forces, but understanding how to work with the interplay of them in quite, with quite that light touch. I'm not going to go too far into that card, but that really sort of sums that up. So if in this instance, one of those horses is that intentionality, that will, that true will, what comes up, that resonance from the heart. And I sometimes even call it fierce intentionality. There's a power to what I call fierce intentionality. But again, it isn't a tight grip. It's not trying to control the world. It's not ignoring the world. It's this fierce intentionality. But even fierce intentionality, as good as it is, if it's all fierce intentionality and no freedom and no dance and no flow, it's not magic. It's not going to create in the same way. But if it's all freedom and it's all dance and it's all flow and there's no fierce intentionality, it's not going to create either. But it's not a matter of holding the two in equal balance. It's about the interplay of the two and managing that interplay across time, which means you don't get to go to sleep at the wheel. You know, there's always bringing that back. It's always living that process. It's always doing the magic.
I love that. So we're almost out of time. There's something that I think has been a bit of a thread as we've been talking. I've been noticing around that energetic feeling, that resonance, which for me more and more has become the way I can feel whether I'm in alignment with will. That's what I've noticed over time. Like, oh, it has a distinct feeling to it energetically. And I love what you said about vision. It isn't actually like, even for those of us who are very, very visual, I completely agree with what you're saying. Like, sometimes my will has spoken to me in visions, but when I think about kind of overall that North Star, it isn't really about a picture. It isn't about a vision. It's about an energetic feeling that I'm living into. And in those moments where I, as you described it, kind of go to the top of the mountain, I can feel that so viscerally, so clearly. And then I spend my day in acts of creation that bring me into that state. And I kind of go like, this is when I'm aligned. This is alignment. So I'd love to know, but that's taken time to get to that place, which is, you know, a combination of lots of things. Again, liberating myself from what's in shadow that compels me. All of that has taken time and getting more and more familiar with that energetic. But I'd love to know your thought, your experience of that. And I guess anything else that you would like to leave listeners with. I mean, this is a topic we probably could have just spent the rest of the day talking about. Unfortunately, we need to bring it to a close. But yeah, anything else you feel would be helpful to say on this?
No, really. I mean, just an acknowledgement of that idea of, it's not an idea, it's the reality of it. It's taken you time to develop, I'm going to use the word craft here, which very much associates with the magician archetype. A lot of the time people think, to me, there's real craft to this, real legitimate craft. And people often don't recognize that. So they're looking for a formula rather than trying to develop their own craft with it, their own skill, their own capacity, their own capability. And I think this is one of the things, why a lot of the stuff like, from the law of attraction stuff, it gets taken superficially, like it's a method.
Yeah.
Right? That requires no skill to run. As long as you know the method, you can do it. There's no inner skill. There's no inner acuity required. There's no ability to be able to discern between a compulsion and an impulsion and what's in your heart. And then, it's just, as long as I do the formula, got my vision. But there's this real craft, and this craft that comes from an ability to witness and see. And I love the old know thyself above the temple of Apollo. One of the things I'm often saying to my clients is that people are generally very poor witnesses to their own processes. And a part of the work of whatever you might call this, sometimes I call this personal mastery, just as a frame, because I don't know what else to call it, is being able to see and calibrate these differences between things. Notice the different sort of internal energy signatures between different states of being and different states of engagement with the world, and start to live at the level of choice with that. I think Epictetus said there's only two places we have power in life: without conceptions and without choices. And people often go, choice. I understand choice. Choice is about the actions I take in the world. What about the choices in here? What about the inner choice? What about the discernment between this and that? That way of being, that line of information, that internal acuity. What about the choices there? And in order to be able to have a choice, you need to be able to recognize a distinction. You need to be able to see those things and work with those things. So I think there's a whole level of craft there. some people who are listening to this, that will resonate to them. They'll go, yeah, I understand that, because they've done they've done enough of that inner work to be able to recognize that we're talking about something real here. And then there's a whole world of people out there that say, what are you talking about? That's just waffle. It's just made up stuff. And to them, that's true, because they're not seeing it. You can't work with what you can't see. So I and this is one of the reasons why, for me, I love developmental work. And I'm often making this distinction because I'm known in the world of hypnotherapy and hypnosis as a change work guy. And I'm often drawing this distinction between developmental work versus change work. And I get some people say to me from the hypnosis world, James, why do you do coaching? Hypnosis is so powerful. Hypnosis is so wonderful. And I think there are lots of tools in that toolkit that can really serve a developmental path. But they can also, a lot of people that sign up for hypnotherapy, they're actually signing up for something that can stand in for their own power and their own choice and their own will. They're turning up and saying, well, I can't do it, so hopefully hypnosis can do it for me. Right? Yeah. In fact, and I want to switch down my level of consciousness rather than switch up my level of consciousness. I want to go to sleep more and just wake up with a different life, instead of becoming more awake, switching on more to where they have power within themselves, where they have choice within themselves, and developing that level of inner mastery that can then express out into the world, if that's the choice that you make, if you're interested in that magical path of living as a creator and a creative force in life. It starts from the inside.
Mm. Oh, you tied a nice neat bow at the end of that, James.
That's good.
So, this has been fabulous. It really has. Where can people find out more about you and your fabulous work, and, dare I say it, your new book?
Okay, so I'm in a kind of liminal phase at the moment. So I'm not teaching any hypnosis outside of my hypnosis online deep apprenticeship. People can find out about that if they had an interest in that in hypnosiswithouttrance.com. But in the main, going forward, I am focusing on developmental work, living as a creator in the world. I would just suggest people find me on Facebook under James Tripp. There's probably a few other James Tripps, but only one that looks like me. And on YouTube. So I'm bringing back to life my YouTube channel, more aligned around what I would call living as a creator and around personal mastery. Personal mastery is just a frame I use about looking at that inner stuff, looking at that ability to work with what's going on within ourselves. So as we choose to show up and engage in the world, we have a lot firmer grip on the tiller, so to speak, of our own lives in that respect.
Yeah, I really like that phrase, personal mastery, actually. Yeah.
I mean, don't want to open up anything, but I've stayed away from it for a long time, because even though it's actually, and this is an example of what's in my heart. For a long time, that phrase has really resonated for me in my heart, but I've stayed away from it because from a marketing perspective, it's not differentiated enough from everybody else's stuff. So marketing strategy, personal mastery is a lousy tag, but it's the thing that aligns most closely with what's within me and what has been my journey and my path since age 19, where I had a moment of awakening of personal power and will, I suppose, when I had this realization that the world is not going to reorganize itself to suit my needs, which means it's down to me as to how I show up and engage in the world in order to create what I want to create. So that was a big power switch for me, from the powers out there to the powers in here. That happened when I was 19, and that's been my journey since, is in looking at how where is my power in how I show up and engage and create the results that I want in the world. And that's the work that I love doing with people, which is why I've kind of moved away from the sort of change work stuff and I'm much more aligning now with that developmental stuff.
Well, you put that out there now.
I have done. Yeah. Right here. You heard it here first.
I'm so glad I could provide the portal through which you could bring this new evolution of James Tripp. Well, thank you so much. As ever, this has been just wow. Yeah, all the things.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you. I'm not going to say any more because we'll just open back up again. So,
I loved that. What a great show. Here are my best bits. Aleister Crowley said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." But he didn't mean just do whatever you fancy. He meant live according to your true will, which could also be seen as your soul's will or divine will. We can be the creator of our reality with a small c or a capital C. Many forms of spirituality give us the understanding that we are the creator of our reality, but we truly become the creator of the big C when we learn how to choose what we create. Mastering the interplay of our will and flow is the place that aligned creation happens. I love James's use of the chariot cards to illustrate how we can dance with this energetic tension. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 329. And if you are a man who is feeling the call to waking up masculine, go along to primalhappiness.co/WTWM to claim your space. If you don't want to miss out next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode delivered automatically to your device as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.